Hello there, I'm Nastasia Tay, and this is the News Hour live from our headquarters here in Doha. Coming up in the next 60 minutes, fears of mass atrocities in Myanmar with reports that troops are gathering in the restive north. A show of strength by Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban on a symbolic day marking an anti-Soviet uprising. But a united opposition is mounting its stiffest challenge in a decade. Italy's former interior minister goes on trial for kidnapping and the abuse of power for preventing a migrant rescue ship from docking in 2019. And tens of thousands of people from minority faiths rally in Bangladesh, protesting against a recent series of attacks on Hindu temples and homes.
And in sport, the Houston Astros are heading to baseball's World Series.
Here comes the 0-1. Fly ball into left. That should do it. Astros!
They beat the Boston Red Sox in Game 6 of the American League Championship Series.
Now, Myanmar's conflict could be about to escalate into an even greater human rights catastrophe. That's the warning from the UN Special Rapporteur, who's fearing mass atrocities and even more loss of life. There are now reports that the military junta is deploying tens of thousands of soldiers and heavy weapons to the north and northwest. That's where armed groups have been resisting its rule since the coup in February. The UN says the military used similar tactics before carrying out genocidal attacks against the Rohingya in Rakhine State back in 2016 and 2017. At that point, about 740,000 people fled into Bangladesh. 250,000 more people have now been displaced since February's coup. The UN says about 1,000 people have been killed, many others tortured or detained. Well, we spoke to the UN Special Rapporteur, Tom Andrews, about his warning to the UN General Assembly. He says urgent action must be taken to prevent what may be clearance operations.
Things are very, very tense, and what's happening right now is that we have the dry season upon us, and that is traditionally a time when there is an escalation of military action, and we have seen the deployment of tens of thousands of troops, heavy weapons and equipment into the northwest regions of the country. So this is a very, very disturbing sign. We have seen increased human rights violations. Many people are caught in the crossfire, and we're very, very concerned that we could be seeing now imminently a significant loss of life. I hope I'm wrong, and I'm hoping these calls for restraint will be heard. But right now, I'm deeply concerned. Well, what we saw in 2016 and 2017 was a mass deployment in Rakhine State of troops and weapons on a very systematic basis. And then all hellfire broke loose, and these troops surrounded villages. They attacked them ferociously. Many people were killed. There was incredible, horrific human rights violations, torture, just unspeakable violence. And so we're seeing that pattern. We're seeing the massing of troops, the deployment in areas that the junta has decided is an area that needs to be, as they say, opening up clearance operations. Now, this is a term that everyone in Myanmar knows, at least those in the ethnic areas, that means potential very ferocious attacks and mass atrocities. So they've talked about clearance. They've defined the genocidal attacks against the Rohingya as clearance operations, and we're hearing that term used again as we see tens of thousands of troops deployed to the northwest of the country.
Well, moving on, and rival rallies are taking place in Hungary's capital in support of opposing candidates in parliamentary elections next year. Thousands of supporters of Prime Minister Viktor Orban have been marching through Budapest on the anniversary of the anti-Soviet uprising of 1956. He, though, faces an unprecedented challenge from a united opposition spanning the left and the right. Peter Markizai, a Conservative mayor, is their candidate, and they're hoping to end Orban's winning streak. He's now been in power for the last 11 years.
It's amazing what the opposition is doing, slandering us, threatening to confiscate our assets, to imprison us. It's disgusting what they're doing. And it's not just us who are here in the front row. Hundreds of thousands of people who came out to demonstrate with us today are sick of the opposition.
I think the opposition is not able to govern. They don't have any concepts. They only have one goal, to oust Viktor Orban, who I think is the highest quality in Europe. I feel he's Europe's best politician. He has a vision for 30, 40 years ahead, and I hope he stays in power.
Well, let's bring in Ulrich Bruckner. He's the Jean Monnet Professor in European Studies at Stanford University, Berlin. He joins us now via Skype from there. Ulrich, thanks for joining us again. I want to start with Orban. His party's won, 3 consecutive parliamentary landslides in the past 12 years, but it seems there are reports that many of the supporters out on the streets today have actually been bussed in from neighboring countries. How much support does he actually have right now at home?
Well, this is hard to say in a country in which Orban has more than a decade to control media, to streamline public opinion, to bombard people with propaganda slogans that the European Union is bad and everything is orchestrated by George Soros and it's anti-Semitic and it's xenophobic and Hungary is threatened and they need a strong leader. So if you hear this over and over and over again, it's pretty difficult to say how much of this resonates in a country that is more conservative than liberal societies in the west of the European Union.
Sure. Well, then let's talk about his opposition contender, Peter Markizai. 49-year-old, Catholic conservative, father of 7, no party affiliation. I was listening to him speak, and it really feels like he's trying to capitalize on his status actually as an outsider.
Well, this is the surprising thing, because in the attempt to get its act together, the opposition managed to nominate the ideal candidate for a society like Hungary. The alternative would have been the vice president of the European Parliament, and she sort of represents the EU, which is considered in Orban's propaganda the evil system that is too secular and not sufficiently conservative and not sufficiently Hungarian. But this new candidate is a family man, he's a mayor, he's conservative, he lived in the United States for a bit and understands that he can try to learn from what Bernie Sanders successfully did to mobilize the masses.
Well, we are talking about a pretty diverse 6-party opposition alliance here. It feels like one of the only things they really have in common is actually wanting to defeat Orban. And as you say, some strategic decisions have been made to that effect. I'm curious about the choice of Markizai. I guess it's hard for Orban to vilify a man who really embraces the values that he actually promotes, it seems?
Well, that is certainly a weakness, that he doesn't have the same apparatus and not the same financial firepower than Fidesz, that is in power for so many years now. But I think there is a strong appetite for change in the part of society that understands that being constantly bombarded with lies and propaganda and anti-European sentiments is not the future of a country in which a lot of people identify with European values and see themselves as Europeans.
Well, speaking of European values, I know one of the things that Markizai has said is that repairing Hungary's relationship with the EU he views that as the biggest issue after those rather tumultuous years with Orban. I imagine Brussels will also be watching the run-up to these spring elections very closely?
Well, of course, it is very important for the European Union to see what's happening in Hungary, because we are currently not only discussing rule of law and the quality of democracy issues with Hungary, but also with Poland. And both countries tend to turn into something more authoritarian and back each other. So it's not just a question of what is the future relationship between Hungary and the European Union, but also to send a signal that change is possible, what we have seen already in another country that is leaning towards an authoritarian trend, which is the Czech Republic, and people there managed to win elections against the ruling party.
Well, speaking of winning elections, I see in his victory speech from the primaries, Markizai was saying that this election isn't exactly being run with an even playing field, given the resources that Orban has at his disposal. Do you expect a free and fair vote, and what do you rate as Markizai's chances?
Well, it is very early to predict anything because what Viktor Orban has been doing in the last more than a decade is to prepare a toolbox to stay in power. And how he will use it, his control of the media, his propaganda tools, the streamlining of public opinion, dismantling the separation of power, this remains to be seen. There's a very strong will to stay in power. This is not the idea of you borrow power from the demos for a limited time. This is certainly a power guy who wants to stay, and he will try everything he can to stay in office.
Well, we'll continue watching that very closely indeed. Ulrich Bruckner there from Stanford University, Berlin. Always great to get your thoughts and insights on Al Jazeera. Ulrich, thank you for joining us again.
Thanks for having me.
Well, now, Italy's former Interior Minister, Matteo Salvini, has gone on trial for his role in blocking a migrant rescue ship back in 2019. The far-right politician is now accused of kidnapping and the abuse of power for preventing 2 vessels from docking for days. Adam Rainey reports now from Rome.
The trial of Italy's former Interior Minister, Matteo Salvini, began on Saturday in Palermo. He stands charged with kidnapping and dereliction of duty for preventing a boat from disembarking migrants after they were rescued at sea. The court quickly approved the prosecution's list of witnesses, including Italy's former Prime Minister and the actor Richard Gere, who volunteered on the boat that was blocked from docking.
Defending the borders is a duty not only for a minister but for everyone, and it's emphasized in our constitution. I think being accused of doing my homework is nonsense. I'm sorry that Richard Gere is coming to testify at the trial. I wonder if it's serious that Richard Gere of Hollywood is going to testify about my behavior at a trial.
At the heart of the case is Salvini's 2019 order to block that boat, which was carrying 147 migrants from docking on Italian shores. The vessel, operated by the Spanish NGO Open Arms, had rescued the migrants in the middle of the Mediterranean and spent 3 weeks waiting for a safe port so they could disembark. At the time, Salvini had decreed a closed ports policy meant to keep migrants from trying to cross the Mediterranean. That policy kept the migrants waiting about 2 weeks within sight of the Italian island of Lampedusa. During that time, many jumped into the sea and attempted to swim to shore. The experience of being kept at sea had a devastating effect on the migrants, according to the psychologist who spoke to them while they were still on the boat.
Being kept on board meant they were re-traumatized again and again. They felt continuously abused. It was an abuse of power.
Salvini says he was just carrying out the policies of the government at the time.
This trial comes right as Matteo Salvini finds himself in one of the weakest political moments of his career. And in many of his statements, he's deflecting from the main issues at hand and blaming the trial on an overzealous judicial system that he says is wasting taxpayers' money.
If convicted, Salvini could face up to 15 years in prison. With more than 24 witnesses set to testify, the case will carry on for several months. Adam Rainey, Al Jazeera, Rome.
Well, speaking of migrants, in Poland, a group of mothers have now gathered to show solidarity with migrants who are trapped at the border with Belarus. The EU accuses authorities in the Belarusian capital, Minsk, of deliberately letting migrants and refugees cross into the bloc. The issue of how to deal with the crisis was a major topic at a 2-day leaders' summit, but there still appears to be little consensus. Well, our correspondent Step Basson spoke to migrants in the German city of Leipzig, who made the journey to the EU through Belarus.
Muatasam and Hussein managed to reach Germany after spending weeks in no man's land between Poland and Belarus. Both of them fled the war in Yemen and reached Malaysia. It was there they heard of a new gateway into the EU, travel agents selling visa invitations from Belarus.
The travel agent it's normal. They have office and they work for 10 years. Yes, but they contact the Belarusian agents.
Muatasam and Hussein paid $1,000 each to travel agents and took a plane to Minsk. From there, a taxi took them to the border with Poland. They spent weeks in the forest between Poland and Belarus. The border guards from both countries pushed them back and forth across the border. They say the Belarusian guards refused to let them return to Minsk.
They told us, I will kill you here. You will be die. No mindset. You should go to Poland.
So they force you to
Yes,
cross the border.
and they took us. They give us a cutter. They told us, okay, Poland from here, go.
And they gave you the cutter?
Yes, they give us the cutter.
To do what?
To cut the barbed wire.
We were stuck being sent back and forth between the two countries for 20 days. The Belarusians would tell us to go to Poland, and the Polish would tell us to go the opposite direction to Belarus. For 20 days we had no access to food or water, and the Belarusian police would either point their weapons at us or beat us and repeatedly tell us to go back to Poland.
But the pair was captured by the Polish police again and brought back to the border.
We told them Belarus border is so dangerous. Take us to anywhere. They said, we don't care, go to the hell.
After finally making it into Poland, they took a taxi to the German border, where they were detained by the German police.
It's a great feeling, especially when the German police caught us. They welcomed us and told us you're now safe and secure in our hands.
Mu'tasim and Hussein have applied for asylum in Germany, where they hope they can start a new life away from the war in their country. Having barely survived their ordeal, they are urging other refugees not to travel to Europe through Belarus. Stepvassen, Al Jazeera, Leipzig.
Well, now it's been revealed that the U.S. detained the highest number ever of undocumented migrants and refugees on its border with Mexico over the past year. More than 1.7 million people. 147,000 of them were children. Migrants from Mexico and Central America made up a huge share. Crossings began rising last year, but significantly escalated after U.S. President Joe Biden took office. Now, tens of thousands of people from minority faiths have been rallying in cities across Bangladesh, protesting against a recent series of attacks on Hindu temples and homes. At least 6 people were killed earlier this month as Hindus were celebrating a religious festival. And followed claims that the Muslim holy book, the Quran, was disrespected in a temple. The protesters are calling for a judicial commission to investigate those attacks. Well, there have been demonstrations by several different groups since communal clashes 10 days ago now. The government has deployed security forces in 34 out of 64 districts. Security has also been increased at Hindu worship sites. Bangladesh's constitution designates Islam as the state religion, but it also upholds the principle of secularism. Hindus make up about 10% of the country's nearly 170 million people. Rights activists have recorded more than 3,000 attacks on the Hindu minority since 2013. Tanvir Chowdhury is at those demonstrations in Dhaka.
Thousands of protesters have gathered here at Shahbag Square in the capital, Dhaka. People from all walks of life, Hindus, Muslims, Christians, Buddhists, have gathered here to protest against what took place in the last several days across the country against Hindu Bangladeshis. They're here to protest. They want justice. Many of them are on hunger strike. We spoke to some of the protesters. This is what they have to say.
Our holy Hindu book was banned, many Hindus were killed, minority women were raped. These incidents keep happening, one after the other, yet we never got real justice.
One of the key suspects was arrested on Thursday night, but people here said that the people behind the conspiracy should be brought to justice and should be exposed. Another key demand is that the state religion, Islam, should be abolished from the constitution.
We were born here, we're taxpayers and contributing to the country's development in every sector, yet we're being attacked and marginalized in every way. Now we're here to protest and fight for our survival.
People believe there's politics behind all this. They want the real people who were behind this carnage to be brought to justice, not just scapegoats. If the justice is not met, they said they'll continue to protest in coming days.
Well, Meenakshi Ganguly is the South Asia Director at Human Rights Watch, and she's called on the government to do more to protect minorities.
This has been, something that has been brewing for a while, and which is apparent by the sort of trigger that occurred here, which, the person that has been arrested was a man who deliberately went and put the Quran in a Hindu shrine, which of course was what upset people into this violence. But I am encouraged by the fact that Bangladeshi civil society has come forward in the way that they have to deplore this kind of violence against the Hindu minority. Part of the problem is that we are seeing this kind of religious violence across many parts of the world, and almost always religious minorities are targeted. And what it needs is for the state to take very clear positions that they will not tolerate this kind of thing, that there is public messaging for communal harmony, that people that are responsible are properly prosecuted. And unless that happens, and the message goes down strongly from the state that it will uphold the constitutional protections that are provided to minority groups, these kind of triggers will continue to harm minority groups.
Now, Pakistan has deployed 30,000 extra security personnel to Islamabad to prevent violence at rallies by a banned political group. Members of Tehreek-e-Labbaik Pakistan are marching to the capital to demand the release of their leader, Saad Hussein Rizvi. 2 police officers and 2 protesters were already killed in Lahore on Friday during confrontations. Protesters have tried to storm the offices of Sudan's news agency. It was an unsuccessful attempt to stop a press conference by the Forces of Freedom and Change coalition, which is part of the transitional government. The protesters were members of a breakaway faction. They want a temporary military administration, while their rivals want a civilian government. Turkey's president has ordered 10 Western ambassadors be expelled for calling for the release of a jailed philanthropist. Osman Kavala has been in prison now since late 2017 without being convicted. He was accused of financing the 2013 Gezi Park protests and of participating in a failed coup, which he denies. A joint statement from several countries, including the US, Canada, France and Germany, alleged that the case cast a shadow over respect for democracy. Now, the leader of an alliance of 9 Haitian gangs says its members are not responsible for kidnapping 17 foreign missionaries. The head of the G9 has marched through Port-au-Prince, flanked by hundreds of people in defense of the armed groups. Manuel Rapolo reports from the Haitian capital.
A show of force by members of the G9 gang in Port-au-Prince. While images of heavily armed gang members marching freely through the city streets might seem surreal to many, it's a scene that's become quite common in the Haitian capital. Some gangs, like the G9, are even trying to reinvent their image and appear more like a political organization than a criminal enterprise.
We want to build good schools, good hospitals, have good, clean water. We are the sons of the nation.
On the streets, gang violence seems to be getting worse by the day, and growing insecurity means part of the job of public transport drivers is to always keep an eye out for trouble.
The police could do something for us because they're the law, so they're the ones that should protect us, but they don't do anything, so we don't know what to do.
Gang violence is not a new phenomenon in Haiti. Even government leaders have been known to use gangs in the past to exert political control. But locals tell us the scale of the violence is reaching unprecedented levels.
We need security in this country. We can't go on living like this anymore. We have people with guns everywhere, and the police beats us with sticks, and everything is really hard for us. We need change in this country.
Despite the dangers, people still have to go out if they want to make a living.
For many residents of Port-au-Prince and for drivers, simply commuting around town is one of the most dangerous activities they can do, running the risk of being kidnapped, being robbed, or getting caught in the crossfire of rival gangs fighting each other over control of different parts of the city.
An estimated 50% of territory in the Haitian capital is said to be under the control of criminal gangs. And while the case of 17 hostages being held by a gang known as 400 Marozo has attracted international attention, foreign aid groups say the magnitude of the security crisis has far-reaching implications.
The gangs are expanding their power and their control on areas of the capital city. And again, it's a vicious cycle. If you have more insecurity, then humanitarian actors, then the state authorities can no longer bring humanitarian services and access to basic services to the population, which then leaves the space to criminal gangs to take power. This is the cycle we need to break.
While some fear becoming victims of violence, others have accepted the slow takeover by crime syndicates, a symptom perhaps of the distrust many have of authorities, complicating the efforts to win back control of the city from the criminal groups who are trying to run it.
Well, let's now speak to Maniel Rapallo. He's in Port-au-Prince. Mani, what are you hearing about the status of those 17 hostages now? Do we know how they're holding up?
It's been almost a week now since the kidnapping took place, and we still have no real status update on the hostages. There's been no update on the status of the investigation, the status of the $17 million that kidnappers are demanding for their release. The most recent developments that we've been reporting are that march, that demonstration that took place on Friday with members of the G9 gang who were marching openly, heavily armed gang members through the streets of the city. Before that, it was that social media post by the Gang 400 Mogozo, which is the gang that's actually responsible for the kidnapping of these 17 missionaries. In that video, the gang leader is heard saying that he's willing to kill the hostages if he does not get what he wants, those demands being $17 million in exchange for the 17 hostages. Now, there's been no statement from government officials, and this could be partly because of perhaps a strategy by local authorities that are working hand in hand in close collaboration with U.S. federal agents here on the ground in Haiti that may not want to reveal the exact strategy to secure the release of these hostages. But we should remind our viewers that this is a very delicate situation made exponentially more complex by the worsening security situation here on the ground. Nastasia?
Mani, as we saw in your report, those protests have obviously been continuing, and the gangs are now out on the streets of the capital too. What is the security situation like there now?
There have been protests every day in the Haitian capital since the kidnapping took place. But what we're seeing now is that people are not only protesting against the worsening insecurity, they're protesting against widespread fuel shortages, a lack of clear government leadership when it comes to these efforts to secure the release of the hostages. It's worth putting into context that violence here in the city didn't simply jump overnight. There was a spike in violent crimes like kidnappings and extortion following the assassination of Haitian President Jovenel Moïse in July, and then again following that devastating earthquake that took place here in Haiti in August. And then you have to consider that a lot of people have lost their jobs, they've lost their income linked to the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. So this is almost a perfect storm for the proliferation of violent crimes like kidnapping. And unfortunately, there just doesn't seem to be a whole lot of optimism from people on the ground that things are starting to improve.
Well, Iraq's been back to normal temperatures now for about 4 days, so everything's cooled down. This is the weather as it should be at this time of the year. No particularly strong wind, even the Shamal has weakened. A little bit of snow in the far north of Pakistan, and something significantly happening around the Black Sea. Now, if we zoom in to what's happening on Monday, again, the snow has disappeared more or less, but there's a significant change in the Caspian. Cold air that's coming out of really western Russia is going to, I think, pick up some showers, produce some showers, likely as snow over Armenia and Georgia, and showers maybe of rain coming down towards northern Iran. But the real nasty stuff is going to be on the eastern side of Turkey. Significant snow here, rain around the north coast, and the winds picking up again down to the Bosphorus and the Aegean, coming down to the north coast of Egypt. I think most of the Levant will be fine. It'll feel a little bit cooler, but it looks as though it'll be still sunny skies. In tropical Africa, on the eastern side, the wind is so weak now, we'll get a few coastal showers in Mogadishu, otherwise Somalia, Kenya and Ethiopia are largely dry. But further west, the rain is starting to go south with the sun. It's concentrating in Cameroon and Gabon, but it's going south through DR Congo and into the eastern side of Angola in waves of very heavy rain.